The Mystical Emergence podcast is for mature audiences and entertainment purposes only, and should never be used over sound medical advice. In this episode, Necromania. And now, here are your hosts, Mystic and the Wizard.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Mystical Emergence podcast. I'm overly excited yet again because we have Hoodoo Moses back with us today, and we are talking about my favorite topic, necromancy, talking to the dead. I'm really excited to pick Moses's brain on this a little bit, and yes, I have all of y'all's questions from Instagram. So let's get to it. Moses, you want to give a quick intro of where people can at least find you one more time?
Definitely. And what's up, everybody? Good to be back. You can find me on Instagram at Hoodoo Moses, Facebook.com/Hoodoo Moses, HoodooMoses@gmail.com, also HoodooMoses.com. Anything with Hoodoo Moses at Cash App and Venmo too.
Awesome. So let's just get right into it. So what is your experience with necromancy yourself? When did you get into it? What drew you to it?
I honestly am pretty fresh with it practically. It's like a newer part of my hands-on practice. I've been working with spirits for a lot longer than I've been working with spirits of the dead. Really because there were just some taboos about it. That I now know were misunderstandings on my part. But yeah, so I've only been into actively practicing necromancy a couple of years. It's been a very reward. It almost feels like cheating to how effective it is in a practical sense. And I have some big aspirations for applying it as a technology. I'm fascinated with the technology in general. It's definitely become a mainstay of what I do. So yeah, it first appealed to me, I think, because I'm a weird dude, and I don't like talking to people, but talking to ghosts is pretty fun. Yeah, that is why you're friends. You're one of the people I talk to, but most of the people I talk to are not alive because they don't talk. At least to me, I don't hear the dead. I empathically feel that in a real way, and I just get a sense. I can get their voices in my head. I don't hear them here. And there's something about that I like. More peaceful to communicate with them.
Yeah, I guess I want to definitely hit on the whole taboo topic around necromancy, which I think people probably don't even know what necromancy is. So we'll actually get into defining that in a second. But there's a distinct difference between, necromancy or being a channel. And right now the word really is I'm a medium or something like that. And I think the word necromancy kind of got poo-pooed on from the Christian church because it's oh yeah, no, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to talk to the dead. So when people hear the term necromancer, it's this, thing of the devil. So I think that's why there's a lot of taboos around this.
Well, a lot of video games too, dude. In every video game that there's a necromancer, it is not some dude sitting talking to a picture and a candle and a glass of water. It's always some dude in the black robe making things come out of graves and cool stuff like that.
So somebody like you is always pictured.
Well, and that's the thing is I'm a little disappointed there's not more of that in the game, but it's okay. It's okay. I like this way.
Yeah, so I just want to cover quick. So being a channel is actually somebody who a spirit channels through their body, where it's speaking through their mouth. So a necromancer and someone who's a channel is not the same thing. I feel necromancy and maybe somebody who describes himself as a medium is the same thing. Would you agree with that?
Well, medium channels usually. Medium passes spirit as far as I'm not a medium. I've been around mediums. I guess they don't. The difference to me is it's kind of if I could borrow some jargon from another realm, right? Being a channel is being a bottom. Being a necromancer is being a top. What's your relationship with that spirit? Are you commanding it, or are you letting it dictate what's going on? So I actually am very interested in learning more about mediumship properly and espiritismo and things like that, because they pass spirit, as I understand, but there's not really loss of control because of, I think, the way that they do it. But in necromancy, it's more like a business relationship with the spirit. It's more removed, not as intimate. I like it. Some people are my friends, some people are my business colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
My business colleagues there's certain intimacy in my life, my kids' names, my relationships, my things like that. They don't need to know that stuff. They need to know the business stuff. And some stuff, like there's certain people, like the present company, who are my friends, right? Like I have a more intimate view of my life. And so I feel the same way with spirits. Like I want to keep the spirits I work with at a distance. But that's how I feel about people, incarnated spirits. I think of it as like there's disincarnate spirits, which is the spirits of the dead, that's necromancy. And then there's also conjuring with incarnated spirits, which is every single human being you interact with.
True.
And so I feel the same way about both of them. I don't treat them any differently. Generally skeptical.
So you were saying how, you've been working with spirits for a long time, but spirits of the dead, like necromancy, is something that's newer to you. So this was actually one of the questions that we had. What is the difference between, saying I work with the spirit, I venerate this spirit, versus working with the spirit of the dead?
It's more about it's the difference between having a boss and having a independent contractor is really different. When you work with a spirit, work with a saint, for example, there's nothing remotely like a reciprocal exchange. If you get into, again, West African and African-derived traditions, totally. You get much closer to an even exchange of goods, or of services for goods. There's a lot more give. If we look at traditional burning a candle to a saint, praying on them, they're really doing it because they're really, really solid people. You're under their patronage. They've taken care of you in some way or another. When you're working with the spirit of the dead, generally speaking, you're going and finding them and saying, "Hey, buddy, you might be able to help me with something. Maybe there's something I can help you with," and that's necromancy.
So, Moses, where does necromancy have its origins? Where did it begin, or where did we find about this exactly?
First, this is prehistoric. Definitely before there was any history. We have in the first, the earliest archaeological finds we have of homes have recesses in the wall in the common area where skulls that had been dug up afterwards and painted red in some way or another were deposited. We find a tradition of keeping a decapitated head in a niche in a wall, specifically for necromancy, in practice in historic ages, in Greece. So it's tempting to speculate that that's an unbroken chain of practice to really the beginning of civilization. What we know, though, from DNA records is that those are ancestor cults. And what we find, again, in African tradition, in West African in African diasporic tradition as well, and the African traditional religions, is necromancy is almost universally a path to and through the ancestors. It's not this going to a stranger in a graveyard and waking them up. That's how I learned to do it, so that's what it is. But I'm not saying it doesn't work, but going through, your ancestors who are the portion of you that are in that frequency, that state of being not incarnate. And you are the portion of them that is in the state of being incarnate. So you can transact on their behalf in this realm. That becomes much more an understanding. And that seems to be what we're looking at when we talk about the beginningness of necromancy, is that understanding that, some of us are incarnate and some of us are disincarnate. It happens generally along sort of these familial lines. And this disincarnate portion of our family is someone that we can talk to. And he's got buddies on that side, just like we got buddies on this side, and we can help each other out.
Getting on to that, how would you use that? Well, I guess two questions. Is necromancy in every culture that you think of, and how do you get them to be your ally?
So working with the dead and ancestor reverence is in, if you count American culture, then no, not every culture. American culture is garbage with our ancestors. every Latin American culture for sure, every Asian culture for sure. We do not have a strong ancestor tradition in modern-day Judaism, but my recent research has led me to believe that that's pretty new. Like 500 years ago, rabbis would very specifically go to the graves of righteous people and cry out to take their spirit up from the grave into their own bodies. And this is like a common practice. It's like required in certain schools. But in modern Judaism, it's, even in that, I say this all the time. People say, well, we don't have ancestor altars, but even in American culture, most people have a mantle with some pictures of some grandparents, maybe an urn. Well, what do you think that is? It's an ancestor altar. We don't pay it reverence, and that's the most common way, is giving it energy through your voice, through your prayers, through your intentions, through physical energy like fire, like a candle, like a lamp, something like that, through flowers, through water. These are the common things we'll find on ancestor altars. Incense is very common, especially in Asian cultures. Offering incense, the idea that it sort of dissipates, it goes into disincarnate as the ancestors have, and it goes to where they have gone. So all these are pretty universal. Indeed, even in Scripture, in the Old Testament, we see references throughout Genesis to hearkening back to the ancestors, people soliciting on the bones of their ancestors. There's even later in Scripture the talk of actual necromancy. But yeah, the ancestor connection is certainly in Africa, certainly Latin America. In the Native American cultures, we see a very interesting commonality in how they approach the connection to the ancestor, the ghost realm, and things like the ghost dance that we see practiced in some cultures. That's an ancestral invocation that actually harkens a lot to a lot of West African ancestor dances. So yeah, we see, I'm thinking across the world, in Europe, the working with the dead in Europe is something that even as the cathedrals, and there's cathedrals that were built 200 years ago, if there's an altar in the cathedral in Europe, it's got what's called relics in it, what we call a reliquary. That means it's got a dead body in it. It's got a skeleton in it. You'll hear of the relics of saints being in these cathedrals. Mm-hmm. If a cathedral's named after a saint, it's because his dead body is in that cathedral. And so we see this all throughout Europe. It gets to in the north, and as we see in sort of Celtic cultures, there's a fear of the dead, more so. And that fear of the dead, in the colder climates especially, it seems to be, that fear of the dead manifests still often as giving them offerings, but it's more like extortion than anything else. There is not the idea that the dead are coming to be cool with you. But everywhere warm, we do see that. So, and of course in, Siberia, Eastern Russia, everywhere we have, true sort of indigenous shamanism, that's completely about going up and down into the realm of the dead amount. Looking at classical Greek and Roman, totally, tons of necromancy, both in the mythology and in the actual practice, in the described histories of how it was done and things like that. And that's where we really see a lot of the digging up of the bodies and things like that. And reanimation being something that was pursued by necromancers as sort of like the next level of their craft. But most cultures just basically just talking to the spirits.
In Naples, Italy, there actually is a death cult there, and they actually have, which it was banned by one of the popes for a while, but I'm not sure how much is still practiced of it. But there was actually a temple where a bunch of dead bones of anonymous bodies were there, and mostly women would go to this church or temple, and they would bring the skull home. And they would put it on their ancestor altar or an altar, and they would pray over this to relieve the soul into heaven and out of purgatory. And then they would bring the skeleton. They would bring the skull back. I would totally do that.
Just to make a note that's in the book.
That's on my things to do.
Well, and we have to kind of consider that the whole cultural attitude towards death was way different until 200 years ago, not even 150 years ago. Like, we're talking about the Civil War era. It's like 1 in 2 people died, something like that. You can Google the actual statistics, but it was crazy. Everyone died. You would have known, like, we all know a few people who have passed, but, like, imagine if half the people you knew died at some point, that you knew that. You know, kids, adults, doesn't matter. So you're surrounded by that, family members. People would have, like, a dozen kids. 7 of them would die. The transience of life, and it's not that life wasn't precious. This incarnation is always seen as a precious, unique time for the spirit, because you're on the other side a lot longer than you're here. But that understanding that it's not like this tragic end was implicit because there was just so much death.
Yeah, I think too. I think that's why me personally, I may not have the same response to death as most people do, or even just working with the dead, because of, like, you know, when I grew up, and I tell people all the time, like, yeah, I grew up, most people know the story. I grew up in a funeral home. It was like in my family. I would sneak around. I would go spy on things I wasn't allowed to see. Like, death always fascinated me. I was never scared to be around dead bodies because what I exposed myself to at a young age. When spirits started showing up at a young age, it wasn't scary to me because it's like I can see their bodies here, I can see their spirit here, whatever. It never really scared me. I also would go into graveyards. Like, yeah, I didn't want to be at home, so I'd go to a graveyard and hang out. I liked being around the dead more than the living. Still kind of do. But I do want to, like, kind of get into a little bit of the seriousness of necromancy, because I feel like, especially since, like, spirituality is really taking off finally in the Western culture, as it should, because it's been so deprived of it for so long. I feel like people first should understand the importance of working with your ancestors first before going out and getting some graveyard dirt, or going into a cemetery and calling up some random spirit to have a cup of tea with. Like, some spirits are really angry. Some spirits will, you know, you can go, if you're somebody who hears spirits and you walk in a graveyard and you're not properly protected, and, you know, you hear or even if you don't hear, but you happen to hear someone say hello and you turn around and no one's there. If you're responding in any way, that's like an invitation for a spirit to come with you. And I think there's a lot of, because, like, you know, people watch things in movies, they get one opinion, but then they hear people like me or you talk, who it's like, oh yeah, second nature to us. But then it's like, there's also like a seriousness around this where, like, protection needs to be done. You have to understand, like, you have more control over the spirit. If you don't think you have more control over the spirit, you shouldn't be working with it. Do you want to touch a little bit on that?
Oh man, so much. Yes. And I'll say, like, if you really wanna go, like, dig up bones and, like, enslave a spirit and force do what you want, you can do that. Go get initiated for it and go try to do it somewhere where it's less illegal. And I'm not going to really give you any more information about that. But if you're an earnest seeker, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But in general, if you just want to work with spirit, and one thing I don't recommend you do is use a Ouija board. That's the number one way people do work with spirits. Using a Ouija board is like having anonymous unprotected sex. Maybe 95 times out of 100, you'll be fine. Probably less than that, though, really. But the times you're not fine, you're really not fine. That's what using a Ouija board is equivalent to, because you are letting that spirit into your body to control your hands.
That would be channel. That would be like being a channel.
Yeah, that's being like a physical medium. Yeah. Now, being just a audible medium means you hear the spirit, or in some instances, they'll actually pass the spirit in their voice. Their voice will change completely, and the spirit will sort of mount the spirit, as we say so when we get to the level of deities, you can mount to deity. They'll incarnate in your body. That can happen with spirits of the dead as well. Maybe that'll be cool, but and I'll say in many instances, it can be thrilling. But in a handful of instances, they will not. Increasingly, they won't want to let go. This is something that we find in every working with the dead. And if you want to be a necromancer who's not like a reclusive, sunken-eyed weirdo, heed this. They will claim you. They will claim your energy one way or another. If you let them into your body, then they will claim your body. They will use it to their purposes. If you didn't smoke before, you'll start smoking. You could eat that food before, you suddenly start craving that food and eating it a ton. That's how you know. But they'll also do it with you if you don't let them in your body. If you just practice necromancy, if you work their spirits, if you train their spirits. I work candles with my spirits a lot. It's just kind of, that's how one of the communication tools I use. And they'll, when I find myself spending 16 hours a day staring at candles, I'll know that they're playing one on me. They'll try to play these tricks to get more of your attention, more of your energy. So you can think of necromancy as really, really well described in that Disney movie, Coco, the one about the ancestors. Surprisingly accurate, right? And that shows actually it even shows Hector, who's not the antagonist, but sort of the guide of the kid, who ends up being the real ancestor at the end. Spoiler alert, sorry guys if you didn't see a Disney movie that came out 4 years ago. But Hector is playing the kid the whole time. He's just fooling it. He's just trying to fool the kid so his memory can be sustained. And so that's what spirits do. That's how they capture your attention. They capture your energy in that way. And it's the same thing. They'll play you. They'll just keep stringing you along to keep your attention. If you think of if people are prisoners or something, and a random visitor comes in and gets to pick one to talk to, they're all going to be vying for that person's attention. And that's the same. This is a lonely, kind of shitty state to be dead, depending. The spirits that are the easiest to work with are in a lonely, shitty state. And because they value your interaction so much, they'll do whatever for you. Necromancy, when done well, is very manipulative. I'll say that.
Yeah, there's been time periods where I will not, I will kind of cut off my communication with the dead, even in readings. So as far as doing readings and people's ancestors showing up, a little bit different than obviously going to a graveyard employing a spirit. But there's even times where things like that, I will ask the spirits that I honor to keep that out of readings. If I'm in a place where I feel like I'm either not maybe so emotionally stable or going through a lot of stuff, because I feel like one of the main things with necromancy is the depth of you having to know yourself, so that when all of a sudden, if you're somebody who's up and down in their moods all the time, and then a dead spirit, you're trying to work with a dead spirit, and this dead spirit is controlling your moods, you have no way of knowing really, this is a spirit, this is me. So it's you got to really be solid in the fact, I know this is exactly how I am, and then when I start doing something random that's not in my personality, it's a way to know, okay, this is the spirit making me want to drink every night.
Yeah, it's usually around impulsive behavior, exactly. It's almost always, sometimes it's around depressive behavior, but it's usually some kind of manic behavior that shows up, and it's dude, I quit smoking 12 years ago, all of a sudden I'm smoking again, drinking, gambling, definitely sex, definitely wandering. Spirits can make you wander. I've had that. You stop all night driving from nowhere, just wandering. A lot of those can be signs that there's a spirit influencing you too strongly. And you brought up something really good there, though, that most of these deities I work with are keepers of the dead in some way or another. And that I rely on that as a protective measure. And I rely on that. I also rely on that to kind of help me get. It makes the whole operation a lot easier. Specifically, St. Michael is charged with taking the souls of the dead, and he also will uplift them, sort of elevate their spirits. So if anyone who kind of works closely with him can easily bring, and he's so generous with his attention and protection and stuff. It's very easy to get him, just, as you said, kind of watching through and filtering things for you, kind of playing gatekeeper.
So can anybody do necromancy?
I think anybody can. I think everybody should when it comes to their ancestors. I think 100% of people should have frequent communication with the spirit of their ancestors in some way or another. should honor the spirit of their ancestors, should connect with it. Not everyone will hear spirits. Not everyone will see spirits. Not everyone will feel spirits. Not everyone will intuit spirits. Everyone will do one of those things, though. It's different. The most developed faculty seems to be different for everyone. But I'm starting to see as well. For years, I always said I don't see anything. Now, I'm actually over the past 2-3 months starting to develop sight. So you can train them just like your normal senses. Like a baby kind of develops their senses, and they strengthen over time. Their senses, if you've never used them, you've gone 20, 30 years without using them, you're going to have a bunch of training to do to catch them up with the rest of your senses, which you can train.
I guess what I'm asking is, like you said, anybody can do this, but it doesn't happen by accident. You have to have the intent on your end that this is what you're going to want to do, or do they just come into your life? Do they just come into your being?
So if you're sensitive, if you're born just by a fluke, you see and hear spirits very strongly, you'll see them everywhere. They'll just come into your life. I'm grateful that I'm not, that I've shut that down if I was ever that kind of sensitive. Because, again, I like to keep more of a distance relationship, and I like to keep it professional and not personal at that level. I don't like them. If they show up, if a spirit shows up in my bedroom, like the spirit is communicating with me when I'm in my bedroom, we have a very, very big problem. And that's like, there's hard boundaries where you can get at me and where you can. So they'll try, though, and if you are sensitive, and you don't know how to put up those hard boundaries, then certainly they can just get at you. But that's very, very seldom the sort of necromancy that I'm recommending, right? Like, you're almost never in control there, and they're basically just feeding off you. And that's an unfortunate situation.
So when you are employing a spirit, like say you went to a graveyard to employ a spirit, where are you keeping the spirit? Like, what is its home while you're working with it? And then, like, how do you bring it back when you're done? How do you leave offerings for the spirit? How does that all work?
So I keep it in a bowl or a pot. I'll bring in their dirt that I collect of them. I mean, if I'm working with a spirit that I have bones of, the bones will be in there. If I have keepsakes, then the keepsakes will be in there. But I'll keep it in a bowl or a pot. There's this idea that you can, especially if you cover it. You don't want to cover it when you're not working with them. But you can, receptacle. Spirit is like fluid, so it'll settle in a receptacle as fluid, or even air settles in a receptacle. So spirit will settle in a receptacle. And so their belongings will make sure their spirit can't get far from there, especially their grave dirt. So I'll keep them something like that. How I give them offerings, it depends on what I'm offering, but generally I'll bury it on their grave. If it's just, I don't work. And then if I'm working with a spirit that I don't have, let's say I want to work with the spirit of Elvis, is probably hard to get hold of. Maybe not nowadays. Do people still know who Elvis is? I have no idea.
Some of us do in the room, yes.
So, like, maybe Elvis would be accessible nowadays. Maybe he's not booked, So I'm trying to work with the spirit of Elvis. I'm not just going to go to Elvis's grave and get his dirt. If there's a spirit I'm trying to build a real relationship with, then yes. But if I'm just trying to do like a one-off, ask you a question type thing, I would send one of my spirits, a familiar essentially, that's what a familiar spirit is, to go get the spirit of Elvis or to go ask Elvis. And it has to be a really trustworthy spirit you send on the assignment, and I would probably send the deity I work with, depending on how important the job is. Some of these deities are extremely good familiar spirits at fetching the souls of the dead that you're looking for, kind of like librarians of the dead, if you will. Otherwise, you can go browse the stacks yourself. The librarian usually can find that. But do people still know what libraries are either? I don't know. I don't know if people know what Elvis or libraries are.
Again, some of us in the room do, Moses. I don't want to say who or what.
I live in libraries. Stop that.
You mean an actual physical library, not like our phone, right? That's what you're talking about, the building.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean that's kind of how you can get the spirit you want to work with. And as far as so for those spirits, I'm probably not going to get offerings. I'm going to have my spirit go get them. I'm not really going to give them anything. Maybe it depends. Maybe I'll pray on them. Maybe I'll offer them a candle with prayers for their light and progress and elevation. And a lot of times when you're rousing a spirit, this is common in what you see in hoodoo. It seems to be a bit of a Congo technology in general from sort of Central West Africa. When you're rousing a spirit with its bones or its grave dirt, you're actually taking its dead resting form. It's resting relatively peacefully, rest in peace, all that stuff, and you're agitating it. In hoodoo, you take the grave dirt, you mix it with red pepper or sulfur or something. It's agitated. You shake it up in a coffee can and tell it that you'll, do what you want it to do, and then when it's done, you'll let it rest. So you're kind of disturbing its peace. That's one paradigm for working with them. The idea of offerings is another paradigm, where you're kind of like enticing them out of their slumber. Two different. You have somebody sleeping, you want to work for you. You could brew some coffee and sizzle some bacon and have them wake up and come downstairs hungry and say, "Oh man, that really smells good." And you say, "Oh, all right, you want some breakfast? I could use some help raking the yard." That's one approach. Another approach is you fucking yell at their face at 6:30 in the morning. Say, "You want to go back to bed? Go rake the yard, and you can go back to sleep." Neither one is right or wrong.
Is there a certain type of is there like a certain type of spirit where it's like, yeah, I would probably want to, schmooze them into doing this with a little bit of booze and a cigar versus, and I'm talking about spirits of the dead, versus like, yeah, no, I'm going to irritate the fuck out of you until you do this for me?
Well, the same, as I said before, don't treat them any different than you would the living. Okay, so who would you shake down with threats? Old ladies, just soft citizens and things like that. Who would you not shake down with threats? Gangsters, people who are powerful, same principles, same exact rules apply.
Getting more onto that, is there a choice? Do they have a choice? They can say no?
Yeah, they're willing, active participant. They're not just commanding their dead spirit. Now, there are traditions, there are necromantic traditions into which one can be initiated where you will bind and enslave the spirit of the dead. And, it's like does a dog have a choice? You can think of them a lot like dogs. That's, in fact, it's called a perro de prenda, right? A dog of the pot. And it's this, you train it like a dog. So the idea is if it's good, you reward it. If it's bad, you punish it. And you break it. Just like you would with a horse, and you make it tame. So there's that paradigm for working with the dead. If you're not initiated in that and you don't know how to do that, don't do that. That would be just like doing that with a person. You have a really good chance of getting yourself killed trying to do that. But but that is possible, right? In most circumstances, though, the easiest way to go is be kind, be polite, be respectful, offer what they want. Different spirits will want different things. Some spirits will want you to just pour whiskey on their grave. Some spirits want you to pray for their souls. You're finding out their biographies. If you're going to a graveyard, doing that, once again, go into Google and go to findagrave.com. There's a bunch of different ones where you can search for the histories of people. And finding specific history about your dead is really helpful. Really helpful, and it'll help you understand what they want, what motivates them. Just like with the incarnate spirit.
What was the first spirit of the dead that you worked with, and what was that experience like?
I mean, the first spirit of the dead that I worked with is always ancestral, But in terms of like a familiar working spirit, it has been, I think, always will be my good man William. Well, that's actually interesting too. So, like the first spirit of the dead that I had a close communication with was also named William. That was William S. Burroughs, and I did my master's thesis research on his occult practices, and I spoke to the people who initiated him and practiced magic with him, and he came a calling. And it was interesting. It was an interesting discourse. But as far as the spirit I've worked with, that's my buddy William R. Bloor, who was buried here in the Longmont Cemetery, who was both the discoverer and operator and president of a gold mine, and left the gold mining life to enlist in the cavalry long enough to be part of a massacre, and then later became a stock breeder, a pretty successful one. And William's a bit of bit of a wild card, but given that he participated in the massacre of Native women and children, he needed some prayers on his soul. So we were able to work out a really good arrangement.
What kind of like protection would you suggest? Like I want to start like first even like going into a graveyard. So like there's specific, like when I go into a graveyard, I know I'm going there like looking for a specific spirit. Well, I might even do it just in general if I'm going to visit someone.
I cover my head.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Like I cover my head. I'll wear certain charms that are blessed, and I'll cover my head, and I'll make sure that I'm not responding to anything I'm hearing. Like that's like my rules. And then the whole thing of like driving home a different way than I came. So like those are like my main things. So like there's like going into the graveyard. Okay, so there's XYZ protection. So touch on that. And but then also like so once you are actually like bringing the spirit home with you, so to say, what are protective measures that you now take in your home so that that spirit like knows its place, it stays where you want it to stay, and etc.
Totally. That's actually really good. So going in the graveyard, definitely cover your head. I always cover my head, even when I'm not going. If I leave the house, my head's covered. But cover your head definitely when you're going in the graveyard. In many traditions, they do it specifically in white. If you want to work with the dead, you'll wear all white on the way in. Because then you'll look like they do, and you'll be able to sort of blend in, be more comfortable. You won't look like a stranger. Always I stop and pay at the entrance, even if I'm just driving in the graveyard to hang out for a little bit. I'll stop at the gate, knock at the gate, pay 3 coins. If I'm going to take anything, I pay at the gate and at the grave. If I'm just rolling through, I'll at least pay my respects. One tradition I've heard that I don't personally do because I, frankly, haven't made the time to, but I really wish I would, is to, the first time you visit a graveyard, find the oldest male and female grave in that graveyard and pay homage there. Or the first graves in that, the oldest grave, not the oldest person, but the first grave in that graveyard, and pay homage there. And that's, because it said that the first thing buried in a graveyard keeps that graveyard. So in a lot of European sort of immigrant graveyards to, East Coast and things like that, there'll be a dog buried there. So the idea is that person, if the person is the first thing buried in the graveyard, that person's spirit is stuck in that graveyard, the warden of that graveyard. So they bury a dog there, and the dog spirit's stuck there, but all the people can go to heaven. So very, very thoughtful. But yeah, that warden of the graveyard, and usually they're buried at the gate, and that's why you pay homage at the gate and make a payment at the gate. When I go in, also anytime I'm going to a graveyard, I'm going to not put on any sort of scented anything, and not even deodorant. You want to be as unscented as possible. Spirits love smell, and they fixate on smell. And, if you smell like perfume or anything really, spirits will fixate on it and they come for it, anything sweet especially. So it's something to think about as you move around the graveyard. And if you're going to make a sweet smell in the graveyard, just be mindful that it's going to attract other spirits than wherever you're making it. So if you're going to burn incense on a grave, for example, it's going to attract other spirits. So there's covering your head. There's not smelling strongly when you go in. There's not responding and not getting sucked in and not engaging with the very busy ones. If you're going to handle anything, cover your hands in cascarilla, powder first. I'll draw X's on my hands in cascarilla too. And then when I leave the graveyard, as you said, I'll stop at least, I'll take a different route than I took there. And if I feel like I picked a bunch of shit up, I'll stop at a gas station, use the restroom, go stop, another place, just walk around a park for a couple minutes. I'll just try to shake them a few places and then go home. Especially if I'm cleaning spirits off of someone and they've got a lot. I'm thinking of someone in particular. I stopped 3 different places, cleansed myself in all 3 places, took the longest possible route home, scrubbed my porch or my front door when I got home, went in, did a full spiritual bath myself when I got home. That can be necessary if you're evicting spirits. As far as how I protect myself, how I command them, first of all, I never bring them right into my home. I don't, maybe if I got literal actual saint's grave dirt, maybe I would bring them, right into my home. But by and large, I'm not going to bring them right into my home. I'm going to either keep them in my car, my garage, some other place, until we have a working relationship to the point where I can make a first deal with them, and that basic deal is going to be as to their behavior. And I'll have to usually, you don't want to rough them up, but you want to let them know that you can. And sometimes they will push boundaries, and I personally will compel them with the holy names. That is extremely powerful, and if you don't know what you're doing with that, I don't recommend you do it. So one great and easy way, sort of spatial, like if you want them out of a certain space, is you can do glasses with camphor. And when I went to New York recently, right, just was on the road working for about a week, and I went to New York and then up to Salem, Massachusetts, and both of those places, at first nothing, but as soon as you start, especially New York, there's no spirits, because they bury them all out on the edge. As soon as you start, I was doing readings out of my Airbnb, and by the time I was done with the third reading, it was like so thick with them, and no peace. It was just intense. So I got 4 glasses of water, put camphor in them, and that they go to drink the water, and then the camphor sort of sucks them dry. Another thing you can use, burn dragon's blood incense. Is very good for sort of very thick spirits. Those two are the really common ones, burning dragon's blood and the camphor water. There's also a different herb, Espanta Muerto, scares ghosts, scare spirits. So it's a good one. I like to bring with me when I'm traveling, especially. Holy water can be a general protective measure. But salt also is another thing they don't like. So it's kind of the idea of like surrounding your bed in salt or something like that. If you have nightmares and it keeps them away, kind of comes from the idea that spirits don't want to deal with salt. There's a whole thing with something like the state of being dead is a lot like being in outer space. It's very cold, and it's very dark, and it's very dry. And maybe that has to do with outer space. Maybe that has to do with the fact that being alive is very, airily warm, physically warm to the touch, and you see light, which dead people presumably don't, and, you have wetness in your body. That's what the state of being alive is. So whatever, the state of being dead is the opposite of those. So they're cold, and they're dry, and dark. So if you remedy that by giving them a candle, right, that helps the darkness and the coldness, and you give them a glass of water, then they're going to be interested in that. They're going to hearken to that. So if you want to set a trap for them, you do that, and then you put camphor in the water. And camphor, like I said, kind of sucks the energy out of the spirit. So that's a good trick for that. You can do bluing if you can't find camphor. That's, again, working with that color of blue, as we talked about in the Evil Eye episode, being a repellent and a very deep blue color is said to sort of confound a spirit and to trap a spirit in some understandings. But some way or another, keeping that glass with what's called anneal or bluing. It's used for laundry. It makes stuff really light. It's poisonous, by the way, so don't eat it. But, keeping a glass of that by the front door is a pretty good way of trapping spirits. And you can just dump that down the toilet or in the sewer or something like that. And in general, holding space is, once you've cleared out your space 1 or 2 times, those spirits usually don't push back in. They don't want any trouble. If you're not going to be easy prey, they'll go find someone easy. You
said about when you went to New York about they have them on the edge. I assume you were talking about grave sites. Have you ever or know of places or cities where they have grave sites and you're thinking, what were they thinking when they put it here? I mean, does that ever strike you?
Well, I mean, you have places like New Orleans where they're like literally under your feet, and in Paris and stuff like that where they just buried them under the city. That at least to me, is like, wow.
What were you thinking when you put the layout of this city?
Well, and I think to a large degree, we're talking about times and cultures where that was, of course, that was somehow comforting. I think also I should say, I think the dead are a lot angrier now than they've ever been, because till a few generations ago, they would have regularly gotten attention, gotten cared for. Nowadays, they're basically forgotten until they get roused up by some careless or very careful motherfucker. And they tend to be ornery because they haven't been getting any, it's like, imagine if you've been a prisoner. You're not civilized. Like in that movie The Rock, when they break Sean Connery out. He's a savage.
So can you accidentally pick up a spirit? So say you're somebody who goes into the cemetery, you're not well versed in this kind of stuff. You walk in. Can you pick up a spirit of the dead on accident? Like I talked about how responding. But if you're not even someone who can hear anything, so can you pick one up on accident? And then how would you know you did? And then what would you do to get rid of it?
So, like, if you don't respond to it at all, you can't. You know, if you're just, like, visiting your grandma at a cemetery, it's unlikely that you would. What becomes likely is if you're visiting your ancestors at the cemetery, one of them will want to ride home, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. How would you know? I mean, if you're totally not sensitive, then you would never know, possibly. That said, what you would see more likely than not is what we talked about before, that sort of fixation. They'll want to smoke, and then suddenly they'll make you want to smoke, and you'll start smoking. Something like that, where you'll pick up like a compulsive habit out of the blue.
That'd be a good sign, like something that's totally against your norm. That's your antenna should go up and go, there's probably something at play here.
Or if it's something that's in your norm, that gets like I'm not totally against eating chocolate, but I don't eat chocolate that often. But if I've been hanging out in the graveyard and all of a sudden I'm like chocolate binging, something's going on, you know?
What would you do? Like, would a standard spiritual cleansing bath be able to get rid of a spirit? Because you talk about, like, you do cleansing baths to get rid of, like, curses, crossings, evil eye, jinxes, whatever. But, like, can that actually get rid of a spirit, or do you need to do something else?
Well, I mean, it depends on the spirit. It depends how determined it is to stick around. More often than not, you can just pray it away. You know, more often than not. And you're not going to generally pick up a very determined, tenacious. The only time you're going to pick up a very determined, tenacious spirit that you can't just pray away by just visiting a graveyard is if you end up in a situation of a baby spirit or a child spirit, which can be problematic. Because they don't really get what's going on. It's the same thing if you deal with a murder victim or something like that. They have no fucking idea what's going on. It's like, a drowning person. Right? They just grab onto the lifeguard and make the lifeguard drown. So that's where you really do. That's the reason to protect yourself, is for those instances.
Was there any advice or anything that you wanted to add on this topic?
Yeah, start with your ancestors, you know. Get pictures of as many as you can. The best way to start being a necromancer is learn the names of 3 generations of your ancestry. Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, all their names. Once you've got all their names, get all their dates of birth, all their professions. If you got that on all of them, you're really off to a good start. Because that'll start putting you in touch with thinking and just in touch with those, and it's going to make the past and people who have passed more real. Right now, you're trained to ignore them. When you get untrained to ignore them, then that's the gateway.
Yeah, I stress that a lot too. I feel like because so many people are jumping on this thing of wanting to communicate with deities and spirits and work with spirits, but it's like your ancestors are going to be the easiest for you to communicate with it.
Not only that, like they're the ones, they're looking out for you.
Exactly. They want what's best for you. Like some rando in the graveyard doesn't give 2 shits about you, and then you have...
Nor necessarily does Santa Marta or something like that.
Right,
like,
I was just going to say that.
If you take care of her really well, any spirit, any saint, right? Like if you really make a relationship with them, sure. But if you just like burn a candle to them and ask them for a big favor, you're way better off going with your great grandma who actually knew you.
Yep. Actually, there's one more thing that I think is important to touch on. So I say this sometimes with people. So me personally, I don't believe that like when your ancestors, like when they die, like when grandma dies and then she like wakes up in the afterlife, she doesn't necessarily like... She's not like world's greatest psychic all of a sudden and has all these like supernatural powers. Like I feel like
she's grandma.
Right, she's still grandma. So it's like if you are asking her to do things for you and stuff, I think it's like sometimes they don't even have awareness that they can do these things. So like, can you touch a little bit on actually like sometimes you have to actually train a spirit or help them to realize what is like, yeah, this is after. Because I mean, some if you have like a crazy like, Christian ancestor who wakes up and they're not at pearly gates, so, they might be a little bit frustrated and not even understand what's going on.
So I could plagiarize all this, or I could just tell everyone to read Martin Coleman's book.
Yes.
Which is Communing with Spirits, which covers this in phenomenal detail. I don't know how many books I sold to the dude, but if he ever finds me, he goes in the future. Just say that, because I sold a lot of books. But it's a phenomenal book. Phenomenal book. I wish I had read it before I learned things the hard way. It's a very safe, more cautious approach than I took, and I think everyone should take it because it's definitely the best way to learn it. But he goes into a lot of this stuff. Training a spirit, it's just like the spirits, just like incarnated spirits. They're just disincarnated. So, teaching an old dog new tricks is harder than tricks it already knows or building off of knowledge it already has. And one thing I always say is, like, don't ask great-great-great-grandma who lived in the 1800s for help fucking finding your lost iPhone. She doesn't even know what a phone is, let alone an iPhone. She's not going to be able to help you with that. Or more technical than that. Like if you're, great ancestors from ancient of days help me make my my car payment. And they don't know what a car is. They don't know what a car loan is. They don't know what any of that is. They can't help you. So better to just ask them to help you prosper, help you do well in business. They know that. Help them make customers come to you who are eager to spend money. They know all that, right? But asking for specific outcomes that they may not understand, you just be really sensitive to the culture and the time they were in. They can learn disincarnate, just as they could learn incarnate. And they have the advantage of being able to learn from disincarnate spirits. They can learn facts, so you can send them to go find out something from someone who would know it, or they can learn skills, and just like in real life. It's all the same thing. But they're generally not aware that they can do anything. They usually have them just like in real life. Real talk, right? Like in real life, you could basically go learn any fact or skill you wanted right now. This is an actual fact in real incarnate life. Well, you maybe are aware of it, but you certainly don't take advantage of it, right? Like how many instruments can you play? How many languages can you speak? How many different dance styles have you mastered? For me, it's a resounding, 3 total everything, and none of that is dancing or instruments, So everyone can go do this incarnate. We just have all this other shit we got to do to keep the body going, to keep the basics taken care of. When you're disincarnate, you're freed up from all that. You can go do that freely. Obviously, you're not physical things. You're not learning how to dance, but you can learn how to work with your spirit from spiritual masters when they've entered spirits. So that's something to keep in mind when you have a relationship with your spirit. They're just letting them know to start asking around. Once you have a familiar, they can really build their skill set that way, especially if they have a very gregarious familiar, if they have the personality for it.
That's awesome. Thank you again so much, Moses, for joining us. You are always such a wealth of information. I just want to end the podcast, this episode, with saying, you guys, ancestors, start there. You can't go wrong by at least starting with the spirits that are familiar to you. And so it is.
And so it is.
The Mystical Emergence Podcast.
The claims, information, or opinions heard on the Mystical Emergence Podcast should never be used in place of your medical provider's advice or your doctor's direction. We have some of the best doctors on the planet, and you should always consult them with all health issues you might be experiencing. Thanks for listening.